Go.
All right, so let us take a little journey down the Rhône River. We are going to start with Fondrache. Domaine Fondrache is in Ventoux. So Ventoux is influenced most heavily by the Mont Ventoux. Mont Ventoux is the largest peak in the south of France, and there's a lot of calcareous soil that's developed in the through the alluvium that makes up that region. So Fondrache is considered to be one of the great producers in Ventoux, probably top 5, and we were able to establish a direct connection with them recently. When I went and visited the property, the white was one of the biggest standouts for me. I found that it had something that a lot of Rhône wines don't have, which is acidity. So it's got this freshness, brightness, and I think it's an incredible crossover style. It almost feels like a little Sauvignon Blanc, which is also, since I buy the Loire, has a great appeal to me, but that's a bit of roll, and the claret provides some acid structure, but I think it's just super fresh, engaging, and often I will personally steer towards other high acid whites when I'm recommending them to customers, to our clients, but I think the Fondrache white is an extraordinary crossover to get people kind of more interested in the styles. You want a little, the style of the Rhône wants a little bit more freshness and brightness and intensity in the wine. So, fantastic, love it. Next, this lovely lady is Coralie Onde, and she is the winemaker for Domaine de la Gance, which is the first white Vacqueyras I think we have ever carried. Vacqueyras was added to the appellation a few years ago, so they can produce red, white, and rosé. Gigondas also just recently added white to the appellation, so you'll start to see some Gigondas Blanc coming out in the next few years. So, including one from Moulin de la Gardette. I tasted a trial bottle from him, it was fascinating. So, when I first visited her, she had just started planting her white grapes, so they were like on the first or second leaf. So now they're about 5 years old, they're mature, they're starting to produce fruit. The classic grape varieties from the region tend to find their way into I think the region allows like Claret and Grenache Blanc and Rousson, Marsan. But it's probably still one of those, like Viognier isn't technically like a classic grape variety. You'll find it in Côte d'Or, but you won't generally find it in places like Vacqueyras or Gigondas going forward. It's too aromatic. It doesn't quite represent what the classic cru style is, but we'll see. Things change. You know, people lobby for different things and rules that they think, you know, can obviously help benefit what their holdings are across the board. But anyways, I think really nice. Here's where you start getting into the more classic textured, a little bit more of the richness, that phenolic quality, which gives maybe a little bit of pithy bitterness on the finish. That's actually for me, very classic white Rhône. So speaking of very classic white Rhône, Clos de la Bonnette, one of my all-time favorite producers that I've visited. They are a Condrieu producer. They are certified organic. They have these beautiful terraced vineyards. I'm going to see if I can find them real quick in this, but no, I didn't break them out properly. But they, so 2021, very challenging year. This is 2020. 2021, very challenging year. Horrible frost. They actually lost most of their Viognier crop, not the Condrieu, but most of their like regular Viognier, so we won't see any of that for 2021. That was like a $25, $30 wine, so it was a great intro to the category, giving sort of baby Condrieu. But the 2020s were a fantastic vintage. There's a lot of that richness, weight, that intensity. You get the classic sort of pear notes, but also a little jasmine quality. So, and this does go through some barrel élevage. It actually goes through all barrel, but it's all gonna be second, third use wood. Some like sourced from other Condrieu producers and some from Burgundy producers. So 2021 is gonna be very challenging going forward. You know, they lost a huge amount of their crops, so we're not gonna see a ton of the 21s. But we just got their 2019 Côte Rôtie, a few cases of that, which is really special. Also organic, which is actually kind of rare and hard to find in Côte Rôtie, because Côte Rôtie has, it's like Burgundy. Everybody owns a tiny little parcel on the same hillside. One guy sprays and everybody's not organic anymore. So they just, a lot of times they're not bothering. There are more and more producers who are aligning themselves with that, but Côte Rôtie is very complicated, and it's one of the few places where you're gonna see a lot of herbicides used, because it's very hard to pull the grasses out of the hills there without like decomposing too much of the granitic soils. Moving on to one of our classic producers, Chateau de Montfaucon. They started making a Lirac Rosé, which, if you notice, the bottle style is modeled after Tavel. Tavel is the next door neighbor. There are many producers in Lirac that own property in both Tavel and in Lirac, but Montfaucon is exclusively Lirac and Côte-du-Rhône. And Châteauneuf. They just purchased 2 new parcels in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which we'll see in a couple of years. We already carry one, which is a leased vineyard, but they've added one. And this is their very first vintage. I'm very happy to say, fully certified organic, and they managed to sneak it through the label approval process, so it's actually on the back label. So you can actually tell people, yes, these are the certifying boards for France, for Europe actually, or the European Union. So fully certified organic now, so everything from 2021 on will be certified organic, except for maybe new properties that they add to their holdings, which would of course have to go through a 2 to 3 year period, depending on what the level of farming was on that parcel before they acquired it. Oh, this is perfect. Fontbonneau, and I actually found one here. So Fontbonneau, this is a Clyde Beffa favorite. Fontbonneau is a Côte-du-Rhône in the northern part of the southern Rhône, so a cooler climatic condition there. They don't get as much Mistral because they're surrounded, like on the very north, by a large mountain, which acts as a shield from a lot of the heavy Mistral winds, which can create a lot of damage through the vineyards, but it also acts as it helps the vineyards breathe and takes away like oidium and moisture. But they are fully organic. They were just recently certified both Demeter and Biodynamics. They are fully committed. This is a holistic project. This is one of the partners. This is, Frederic Anger, who owns Chateau Latour, is one, and this, oh God, I can't think of his name. Yeah, I'll tell you later. But he resides on the property, oversees everything. And this is a high-end Côte-du-Rhône project for sure. So very old vine Grenache fruit on the, in the vineyards. So they also grow lavender. They have truffle oaks. They have cherry trees, all kinds of different fruit trees. So the whole process of like having biodiversity is really, they're really living the dream there. And it's an incredible wood. And so he's actually showing us here, this is what Collioure looks like. So in the early part when I was there were still some berries that hadn't fully formed yet. And so you could actually, he was shaking some of the grapes, the clusters, and this is what this would fall off, meaning that they're gonna have a lot of space in the clusters. So there was a bit of Collioure in 2022, but overall the vintage is looking very strong. It's just a drought vintage, though most of the regions did just receive a large rainstorm at just the right time, which I think will give us a very warm vintage, but also a really, but a great intense, but still balanced vintage. So we'll see. We still have a long way to go before we get there. All right. This is another one of the producers that I'm really happy that we added in the last couple of years, and this is Domaine Roche. They are our Chiron producer. Chiron, let me see if I have the map. Yeah. So we added them. This is our second vintage with them. They used to be with European Cellars, Eric Solomon's company. They parted company. They were sort of, on the market for a little while. I met Rhône when I was at Provine, and we started the conversation, and then one of our brokers actually made the connection, so we were able to bring them in starting with the 2019 vintage. This is 2020. So Chiron is one of the newest cru appellations in the southern Rhône. So this area has great old vine Grenache fruit, lots of old vine Carignan. Most of what you're tasting in the regular Chiron is from the Garrigue region, or this Garrigue parcel down here. So this is more in the flats, lots of gravelly soils in this area as well. And the Marcel Roche is named for his grandfather, who was one of the founders of the cooperative in Chiron. This is back when it was just a Côte-du-Rhône, and they were looking to become a Côte-du-Rhône village. So in the village area, this is Rhône. So he's cooking on a brazier. We actually had these incredible steaks with him and drank some of his magnificent wine. But then these were the lovely meat chops that we consumed that night. So in the very classic French fashion, seared on the outside, raw on the inside. So still very, very good meat though. But it was a fun evening. And this is, his home overlooks on the map, there was the city center of Chiron. That's what this is overlooking. And that's where a lot of this fruit comes from, for the Marcel Roche. So these are actually looking through the vines. These are just outside of his house. And this is some of his oldest vine Grenache. This parcel also is a big part of what is called his Bousquet, which is his best parcel selection. That will be coming a little bit later, probably in the early fall. So we'll see that wine come back into stock as well. So the potential email on these wines here, so staff reviews obviously would be very helpful pushing those forward. And Romain is very good friends with Nico Benedetti. Nico is here. He's one of our Châteauneuf-du-Pape producers as well. So, fun guys. And back to Fondrèche. So Fondrèche in Ventoux has a really nice, like an incredible parcel that sits on a plateau just below the mountain. And so this plateau is actually has a lot of flint composition in it, which is actually quite rare in the region. You don't see too much flint in the area. So very hard soils here. And flint tends to be even more ancient than a lot of the calcareous surrounding soils. So just below that plateau is the sandy soils, the decomposition, which is where the white is predominantly comes from, or actually all comes from. And the rosé is produced in the cooler, sandier soils. The reds are produced on the harder flint and some calcareous soil on this plateau. This plateau is planted to Syrah, a lot of Syrah. So they're very Syrah heavy. And the Syrah was planted in the mid-50s, so it's actually some of the oldest Syrah in the region. And they were using the Serine clone, which is a very popular but very hard to get clone that's produced mostly in Côte-Rôtie and Hermitage for some of the greatest wines, like the Jamais that you're gonna have has some Serine clone in it. So there's regular Syrah planted in the vineyard. That's what this has a lot of, but they're reintroducing the Serine clone through a Massal selection to expand the plantings of the Serine to make it a little bit more complex, maybe longer lived, and it creates smaller, tighter berries. But the Persia is kind of like that parcel selection of this great selection of Syrah. And then the all Serine clone is the Elle était une fois, which is, the Divergente, which we'll see later in the season as well. And the Divergente meaning divergent, so that's all Serine clone, all the oldest parcel from the 1950s. All right, back to Montfaucon, and everybody loves Montfaucon. Rudy is one of the great guys in the region. They've done a ton to really increase where's the day 5? So here's Rudy and his wife Marie. And so this is a dinner, but here's their new Châteauneuf vines. Their Baron Louis is their most iconic wine that we stock. We just got in the 2017, which is a really nice warm, kind of what we call a solar vintage. Lirac sort of is on the western side of the river, so just across from Châteauneuf-du-Pape, very similar soil types. But with the Lirac wines, we have a tendency to find a little bit more dark berry fruit, lots of currant, blackberry, usually finds its way into the style of Lirac, and I think Rudy really expresses that well. And we just rated his library. They always offer up some fun things for us whenever we put an order together. So they just did a re-release of the 2007, which you'll pour around in a second. So you can see like how these wines evolve, pick up more of the sort of meaty, that grilled meat characteristic. But these guys are one of my favorite producers and one of Clyde's favorites as well. So that's our charcuterie plate. So here's Rudy and the new Châteauneuf vines. very excited about. Oops, yeah, that's not his best photo, but this gives you a sense of like what Chateauneuf looks like in terms of soil type, with the big, the big galets, and then this is some like very heavy ironclad soil. So this is actually good for what we're going to taste next, which are the Chateauneufs. So I'll give you a frame of reference as to the types of soils that we're going to see here. So the 07, well, what do you think? So as you starting to taste this for the 17 versus the 07, you can see like how the evolution is.
I like both, but I like the 07
Yeah,
more.
I think it's drinking great. And 07, very, very hot vintage, but iconic vintage. Some of the highest reviewed wines that Chateauneuf ever saw, and most of the Rhône Valley in general. But you get that sort of kind of meaty, evolving characteristic in the wines. So.
That's really good.
Yeah, take a moment to savor that.
Yeah.
So, and I feel confident recommending these wines. They're direct from the winery. The corks are gorgeous. Like this is, I pulled it out with the jankiest corkscrew here and didn't run into an issue. So we're in as good a shape as possible. You're always going to find a little bit of variation in these wines. So if you do get one that's bad, obviously we'll figure it out. But it's not as, they're not as, shouldn't be as crazy as some of the old goofy Cabernet Francs that I get in. So. All right, let's taste the Chateauneuf. So the most iconic region in the Southern Rhône, maybe the Rhône in total, is Chateauneuf-du-Pape. It's actually one of the largest cru appellations in the entire Rhône Valley. You could take all of Chateauneuf-du-Pape, or all of the holdings in the Northern Rhône, and they could fit of cru villages in the Northern Rhône, and they would fit into the production area of Chateauneuf-du-Pape. So just to give you a size of like how different the Northern Rhône is versus the Southern, Chateauneuf was early established, was one of the first designated appellations in the entirety of France. It was part of that first round of wines that were elevated to an appellation status. So, and most famously, they're known for the Galets, but what's becoming even more prominent are the sandy soils. Everybody loves the sandy soils of Chateauneuf-du-Pape because as climate change has increased, we're seeing more and more of the warmth that the Galets radiate back to the wines start to create even more intense, powerful 16.5 wines. So the cooler, sandier soils don't radiate as much heat, and the wines tend to have a little bit more bright red fruit and crunchiness. So you'll see a lot of blending across the two soil types. There's actually a few other soil types, but those are the two most important. And within that, you'll see some people going all sand because they like the crunchiness of the wines. Like Rayas is famously all sandy soils. So, and everybody wants to be the next Rayas. Just to talk real quick about the Anonyme, or the Xavier Vignon. So this hit the closeout. It was in the shared, but I wanted to take one last pass at it. We want to try to email it out just to kind of finish off the rest of the inventory. We've still got about 40 cases of this. It's very well reviewed. I think the wine is spectacular. It's drinking really well. So I would definitely love a couple fresh staff reviews on this so that we can kind of move on. And we're still making decent margin on the wine. It's just not what we were doing before. But there are some other interlopers in the market who have gotten more aggressive on the pricing too. So we're still at the market best, but now we have to be more competitive on this wine in the future. And then I wanted to pour from their library the 2012. We just got some 2012, so you can kind of see what a little bit of evolution looks like in a nice vintage. 12 is a very solid vintage. It followed 9 and 10, which were extraordinary vintages. 11 was kind of like lost in the shuffle. 12, solid. Not as strong as 9 and 10, but very solid. And I think expresses very nicely. So just some more, this is what some of the sandier soils in Chateauneuf look like here. Tennessee. And a lot more and more of our producers are shifting towards organic farming. So I made some notations on there. Montfaucon, now certified organic. Chiron, Domaine Roche just finished their certification, so they'll be fully certified as of 2020, this year, 2022. So everything going forward will be certified organic. Fondresh just finished their certification. They're working towards biodynamic, so they just finished their organic. They've been using biodynamic practices, so you'll see that in probably 2 or 3 more years. They'll be fully biodynamic. They also just picked up another estate that they're converting to their natural wine, very low intervention estate, which is next door, but it's gonna be a different label, different property. All right, let's move on to a couple of the big dogs. I wanted you to taste 3, I think, of some of the most iconic, consistently best producers that run the gamut of cost to quality. One of the beauties of Vieux d'Anjou is they are a 2-wine winery. They do not produce 14 different Chateauneuf cuvées. They don't make, a bunch of like secondary cuvées. They focus on 1 red, 1 white. White we almost never see. The red, cost to quality, one of the hardest to beat. This is, I think, an all-time best. Some 97 to 99 point scores on this, and it's still what used to be $45-50, but let's face it, 65, still a pretty darn good deal for one of the, I think, consistently best value producers in the region. And this, we do have a decent amount of this in stock, so I think that's a strong recommend for anybody who's collecting, putting things away for a few years. So Grenache heavy, but still using a mix of all the other grape varieties. That's Nico Benedetti. And so the Cuvée Monaoul from Ucelio, we actually are now going to be working directly with them. It's not exactly like a classic direct import relationship like our Montfaucon or even like Domaine Roche, where we're working with brokers, but they are going direct to like large accounts. So because of our connections in Bordeaux, they have some affiliations there. We're able to buy this wine directly now. So we will be able to consider it a direct import. The relationship's not quite the same in that, we found you found us, now we have a great relationship. But I think it'll give us a better position in the market to have stronger margins across the board and to have access directly to the wines, as opposed to going through secondary markets or buying it from what is currently the importer, which will probably lose the wine. And then you end up with like lots of supplier markups along the way. So Ucelio, though, their Monaoul they were one of the first to actually start doing breakout cuvées, where they would take barrels of things and then make them into different cuvées. So they have the La Réserve de du Tête or du Terre or something like that, which is their super icon wine, and that's usually in the $200 price range. But this one, the Monaoul, which tends to be a lot of the same fruit from some better sources as the regular Chateauneuf du Pape, but this goes through a little bit more barrel élevage depending on the vintage and the cuvée, like how it all kind of comes together. But always kind of fleshy, rich, decent young drinker as well. And 19's fantastic vintage, some really nice rich fruit that makes these wines pretty eminently appealing. And then probably at the upper tier of the market, Clos de Pape, another producer that essentially, they only produce 2 Chateauneufs, 1 white, 1 red. So their focal focus is on that. They do a declassified wine, the Petit Avril, which we have a little bit on the shelf, but this is the most important. And for what we've managed to sort of keep at the $100 price point consistently, this and Beaucastel are probably the 2 most important names that collectors will consistently buy year after year after year, because even in tough vintages, these guys make extraordinary wine. and they're very vintage driven. They like their wines to taste like the vintage. So the 18 is going to be lighter and more garrigue. The 19's got that rich, intense fruit. 17 is going to have like very dark berry curranty notes to it because it was a warm kind of drier style to the wines. So they're not trying to make the same wine every year. And then on to our Rhones, our northern Rhones. So everything from this point on is going to be 100% Syrah. I didn't want to keep writing it because it's redundant, with the exception of the Guigal, which in Côte Rôtie allows a little bit of Viognier to be blended, but anything red in the northern Rhône is going to be Syrah. So Remisière is one of our most important direct imports in the northern Rhône. This is just their basic entry-level Crozes. I just wanted to refresh everybody's memory on this because I think this is one of the greatest Syrah values we have on the shelf. For 18 bucks, this slaps. I mean, this is a bright, briery, spicy, fruit-filled wine, and I think this should be going to more and more people's hands. And if you guys love it, I will try to get it into the Shared on the next round. We can add some stuff, but your support is always appreciated on this. And anybody looking for a Syrah under 20 bucks, you're going to be hard to compete with something that has this level of complexity and character. So the Remisière, they do everything is destemmed. A lot of producers you'll see in some of the other cuvées will do some whole cluster inclusion, but here they are always entirely 100% destemmed, vintage after vintage. The regular Crozes Hermitage is always done in concrete, stainless steel and concrete tanks. So the more traditional, meant to just keep that freshness, brightness, and the intensity of the fruit. They also don't let their wines get super reductive, so you do get a little bit more clean purity of fruit up front. So you can even open up their Cornas or their Hermitage, and though they need air because they're big and powerful wines, they're not super reductive. And you will taste a little bit of reduction in the next wine. So Syrah, one of the most intensely reductive wine, does need oxygen. That's why there's always a lot of pump overs. That's why they often use oak to allow some microoxygenation. They do a lot of racking in order to help eliminate some of those reductive elements. And then time and air are the other elements that help cure some of that. So I wanted to double decant these, but we just didn't quite get to it this time around. But definitely come back, retaste these later in the afternoon when they've had a chance to let some of that blow off. I don't think they're terrible. Like the Passion, I think is going to be more intense than the Terroir. So Terroir de Granit, this is, so Guy Farge has retired. His son is now making all the wines. No, that's not him. That was a crazy Sunday. Here we go. So this is Thomas. Great photo.
Duck lips.
So
all he does is take great photos.
well, I'm always trying to capture like action shots, so a lot of it is just kind of janky. This is one of their best parcels in Saint Joseph. So everything is on Chalon, which is this training it on these single posts. In Côte Rôtie, they have 2 posts tied together. But then everything is also walled. That's to help keep the granite from decomposing too much and too much erosion, and also to make the vineyards workable. Because when you're in his Cornas vineyard in Les Reynards, it is just a steep slope. So this is in Les Reynards. So this is, there we go. Anyways, this is in Cornas. So that's a good photo. Anyways, Thomas is now doing all the wines. He is in the process of organic certification. He'll be certified as of 2023, I want to say. But when he took over from his father, he began the process. He didn't want to fully commit to certification because he wanted to see how it went. So he did, instead of like the normal 3-year transition, he's done about a 5-year transition. And here's the Passion. Okay, how about that? That's a big smile.
It is.
So Thomas came from, so his father divorced, his mother is Portuguese. They moved to Brazil. So he grew up in Brazil for the most part. His wife is Brazilian, so he speaks Portuguese, English, and French fluently. But he's a great visit, really, really nice guy. And he's, I think, one of the young, great producers to keep an eye on. He's really kind of bringing it. And he did not really have much wine background. His father showed him everything and then sort of handed him the keys. So he started like trying to learn as much from his other producers that he really liked working with, or like really liked their wines. So he is mostly self-taught in that regard, or learning through just trial, really. What do you think of the two wines? Yeah, you like the wines?
I really dig the passion.
Yeah. So the passion definitely has that next layer. It is the oldest vines on the parcel, or on the Saint Joseph part of the property. I think they're like 95 plus years old or something like that. Or maybe they were planted in 1905, something like that. Did I write it down?
1904?
1904, planted in 1904. And this is the Harmonie Cornas. So Cornas is the furthest south of the red producing regions in the northern Rhône, with the exception of Côte de Rhône, Brezem, but that's kind of an oddball like appellation we don't see that much of. But for red production, Cornas is the furthest south. So you're still getting more Mediterranean influence in this part. The further north you go, the more continental it becomes. This is kind of a transitory area. But Cornas always has much more warmth, richness, and heat intensity. So usually they're half a degree higher than even sometimes the Hermitage in some cases. But they're trying to mitigate that by higher slopes or more like plantings that are going to be on north-facing slopes. So they're actually starting to maybe even expand the appellation a little bit to catch some plantings on the northern slopes of these canyons and valleys. Most of Cornas is granitic soil, but there is a tiny parcel in there that actually has some clay limestone in it. So that's it's a great outlier spot. But anyways, his Cornas has a little bit of the Le Renard vineyard in it, and the Le Renard is one of the most iconic and most important vineyards in the region. So people are looking for the cultiest producer, which is Thierry Allemand. That's his next door neighbor, and then Auguste Klopp is the other neighbor right next door. So Renard, great place to be. So you're tasting the Durand Cornas. So I mentioned there's a little area, a sub area that has some limestone. This has a little bit of that limestone parcel in it. So Eric and Joel their family was mostly in fruit. So they still grow, I think, like apricots and peaches and things like that. But this, they also make very, very good kind of sexy forward drinking Cornas. So this is a great producer to introduce people to Cornas because there's always kind of a lusciousness to these wines. This guy literally hit the closeout right after I printed my first sheet. So it's been kind of lingering, but I still wanted you guys to taste it so you can sort of see a contrast between a slightly more modernistic profile versus, say, maybe a slightly more traditional, like, I wouldn't say low intervention, but like a slightly more restrained style versus Farge versus Durand. And there's room for both, I think. All right, we'll finish strong. One of the most iconic producers, and there are two great icons in the northern Rhône and Côte Rôtie. One is Guigal. We're gonna finish with Guigal, but Guigal is one of the largest landholders in the Rhône. So they have choice sites. Jamais is a more like, it's sort of, you're equating sort of like we're Mondavi, and then here we're like Screaming Eagle. So it's like we have a tiny parcel and we have a big parcel. You both can make great wines, but you have very different ideas on how to get to the end product. So Jamais, something we never get to taste. So we just landed a parcel. So I'm like, we gotta do it. You guys gotta get a chance to try Jamais. It's one of the wines that if I had the dough, I would collect, indiscriminately. If you want to treat yourself, just buy the Côte de Rhône or their Colline Rhodanian, which tend to be more like in the $50 to $70 range, and they way over deliver for what you're getting. So those are fantastic values for sure. But there's the family did split, so you'll see the Jean-Luc Jamais on the shelf. That is the brother. He went his own way, took some vineyards, and then I think has put other stuff under contract. But he was the vineyard manager. I think the best quality is still here, and this is the Jamais that's more has more iconic. If people are asking you what direction to go in, this is where to go. But the other stuff is very good. This is, I think, next level. So I hope you are enjoying that. And then I think you'll see a totally different shift in style, but Guigal is probably is synonymous with Côte Rôtie. The three Lala wines, which are La Moulin, La Landon, La Turque, all come from single terroir parcels on the Côte Blonde, Côte Brune, and La Landon Ludi. Where Côte Blonde and Côte Brune split is actually a geological shift. So if you're east of this geology, you're mostly on mica schist soils. If you're west, then there's granitic soils. There's some more alluvium, clays, things like that. So everybody has a different perspective of which is better, but this is a blend of both the Côte Blonde and Côte Brune. So if you were looking at the Blonde and Brune that they release every year, this is the best selection from all of that. Then aged all in new French oak barrels. Everything is coopered on site. So they bring in the best wood staves, they age them for several years, and then they have a cooper who builds all of the barrels, and then that whole barrel program then sort of trickles down to all the other cuvées as this goes into them and the Lala ones do. So sizable production, and a very different style, I think. Even though both see oak, and Jamais is mostly whole cluster, probably 70 to 90% depending on vintage of whole cluster. I don't think Guigal is using whole cluster or very little whole cluster, but I couldn't actually find any details on that. Anyways, that's the show, and we crushed it. We did that fast.
Thank you.
I hope that gives you a lot of enthusiasm for the Rhône.
Fun.